thanks for taking the time to come out, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this convention. As you said, my name is Jason Wagner. I'm a researcher with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. Today I'd like to talk to you about automated and connected vehicles, but not so much the technology in and of itself, which a lot of you are probably relatively familiar with, it seems, but more the implications for state and local transportation agencies. So, as we all know, transportation is changing. It's changing very rapidly. Vehicles, as we know, are in the early stage of automation. We're seeing some level 1, level 2, predictive levels vehicles on the road today, and we expect that additional higher level vehicles will be coming on relatively soon. IT is beginning to connect the unconnected. Vehicles in the past have not been connected, and we're seeing increasing penetration of infotainment systems, of cellular, different data, and different systems making their way onto the vehicle. So we were really interested in what is automation and what does this connectivity mean for transportation providers, so people who actually run the transportation system. So we performed a study, an automated vehicle policy study, looking at exactly that. We wanted to understand the implications of automation on state and local transportation agencies. Since these are folks that run and operate the system, they need to know what's going on, and we need to know what the implications are for them. So to do this, we started off with a literature review. It was in-depth, and we covered all the academic literature. We looked at industry presentations and industry papers, and also some media stories as well. That was the first step. The second step, we performed 2 stages of interviews. The first stage of interviews, we talked to automotive manufacturers and suppliers, automated vehicles, OEMs, and several other different organizations that are private organizations involved in manufacturing and supplying automated vehicles or components. We talked to them, and we wanted to understand what their perspectives were on automation, what they expected the implications would be for transportation agencies, when they were coming on, what their capabilities, limitations might be, these sorts of things, because we wanted to be able to take that information and speak with our second round of interviews, which was state and local transportation agencies. We spoke to folks that the whole laundry list of alphabet soups, RMAs, MPOs, DOTs, DMVs, all those agencies, because we wanted to essentially talk to them and find out what their perspectives are. We wanted to bring this information to them and say, this is what we hear from the industry. What are your expectations? What are your concerns? We performed about 10 interviews with each group, with the OEM manufacturers, suppliers, and the transportation agency folks. Interviews lasted about an hour or so. Like that, we discussed with the transportation or the public agency side, adaptation and preparation. What are they doing to prepare? What are they expecting? What are their concerns? What do they feel will be some of the benefits? What are the implications for them? And we also wanted to find out what are some areas that require further understanding and some areas for additional research. What are their questions? So I'd like to discuss some of the highlights of our study and our effort. From the government perspective, specifically from the government perspective side, my colleague Trey Baker spoke about the private sector's perspective yesterday in a session, and today we're speaking of the government perspective. So one overwhelming theme of our interviews was uncertainty. It is ubiquitous, and there is a lot of unknowns about automated vehicles and about connectivity, especially for state and local government transportation providers. There is uncertainty in the automated vehicle capabilities, what they can do, what they cannot do, importantly also as well. And there's also uncertainty regarding the development path. When will these vehicles become readily available? When will the market penetration increase? What is that going to look like? And what will the capabilities be with these vehicles as they're coming on, as they're coming into the market and they're proliferating? So as a result of this uncertainty that is ubiquitous in this area, the implications are not certain either. We don't know exactly what automated vehicles can do and cannot do. We do not also know exactly what the implications will be on transportation agencies. However, we can say that some of the early indicators point to some pretty significant impacts. I'm going to talk briefly about 4 key areas of uncertainty for transportation agencies that are pretty important and that could have some pretty significant implications. First off is VMT, another good acronym. If you're not aware, this stands for vehicle miles traveled. That's essentially a metric that tells you the total number of miles traveled on the network by buses, trucks, commercial vehicles, pedestrian or private vehicles as well. So all the total miles on your network, that's VMT. I'm also going to talk about congestion, infrastructure design, and travel patterns in urban planning. So first off, VMT. Automation, as we spoke to industries and transportation agencies, we found that automation could essentially be changing the way we use our vehicles in both the near term and the long term. In the short term, or in the nearer term, we heard that there are some pretty significant implications or benefits provided by reducing stress of driving, improving convenience, and also the comfort of driving. And what I mean by that is when you're driving on your commute every day, you're in your car going along, and you're having to deal with traffic, you're having to deal with people cutting you off. It's stressful and it's psychological, difficult, and it's not fun, certainly. If people are willing to, or if the cost essentially of driving, which are both, first off, the opportunity cost, which is essentially when you are driving, you cannot be performing other tasks, you can't be working on email, you can't be checking text messages, etc. You can't do any of these things. So essentially the opportunity cost of your time is one cost associated with driving that is going to change. You'll be able to have much more ability to do things while you're driving. So that's one side. Another side is the actual psychological stress and strain, which comes along with the stress and the comfort and convenience. So when people look at making a trip, they essentially decide what are the costs of making this trip and what are the benefits of making this trip. And they will decide to make the trip based on that calculation. When we're looking at automation, essentially we are fairly certain that, or there is an indication that the cost and benefit calculation will change. So essentially, the costs of driving are lessening, so you might be much more interested or much more willing to take additional trips. So that could be increasing VMT on the transportation network. In the longer term, and that's the short term, in the longer term, when we're looking at potential for autonomous vehicles, there could be some significant implications for that as well. So if your vehicle is essentially able to drive on the network by itself, if it can go out and say pick up your groceries or pick up your laundry or doing these sorts of things that are kind of a further out perspective, this could be a significant increase in VMT because the costs are very much lessened. Now that is a much further away perspective, but that is certainly something to consider, especially for transportation providers who are making investment decisions that are considering 20, 30, 40 years in the future. So, like I said, changes in VMT vehicle miles per hour could have some pretty significant implications for both funding and investment decisions. So if you're a transportation provider and you're looking at building a highway or possibly expanding a highway, you're looking out 30 years in the future and you're saying, well, what is VMT going to look like? Well, right now, we're essentially making decisions based on pretty much an assumption of existing trends continuing on. But we know that automation and connected vehicles could be potentially changing that, so we need to be looking at what those implications are and how is that going to be affecting. So if we know that, for instance, VMT is going to be increasing, that could have some pretty significant implications on needing to change our network configuration, road network configuration. It's also have some pretty significant implications for funding. State and local governments, they're funded by essentially the gas tax. And then VMT is essentially a measure from it is essentially the gas tax. So if VMT increases, you would think that vehicles would essentially, or state and local governments would be getting more funding. But essentially, we can look at it. We can say that right now that is essentially an unsustainable taxation source. So the fuel tax in and of itself is unsustainable because we can look at essentially gas prices. I'm sorry, gas prices. With funding implications are essentially, I'm sorry, let me continue on. System utilization and operational demand can also be a significant issue. As VMT increases, system utilization can also increase, and as well as operational demand. So people will be using the network more, there will be demand increases as well. There's also uncertainty in congestion. Automation's effects right now on congestion are potentially unclear. There can be, we have a pretty good idea that in the short term we're looking out and looking at connected vehicles and saying, well, or at automated vehicles, and there are some indications that essentially if their vehicles are performing automated, if they're automated but not connected, we have these issues of string instability where as vehicles come together and form a platoon, there's instability caused by the system by the vehicles, like one of the lead vehicle hitting its brakes, and that indicate that brake will move throughout the network and cause stability throughout the system to where the vehicles cannot platoon efficiently. But when we connect these vehicles, we can see that essentially those vehicles can travel more efficiently and more effectively through the road network. But there's uncertainty in that because we don't know exactly if that is going to occur. As we know, with NHTSA decision coming out relatively soon, we know that that uncertainty is going to change somewhat. So that indication, or the indication essentially that it's really situationally and system dependent. And there are one-time implications here with long-term planning and infrastructure investments and needs. So what do I mean by that? Long-term planning implications can be, once again, as we look out into the future, we're making decisions right now based on essentially continuing existing trends. But if we know that the roads can be more efficient, that there's more vehicles getting through on every mile traveled, or on every lane, then essentially that can we can change our investment needs right now and investment decisions, and we can have better investment, or we can reduce our investments and potentially make better use of the overall network. There's also uncertainty in infrastructure design, and that congestion section kind of leads well into this. We can look at the lane widths essentially and say that if vehicles are automated and they can travel in a much more precisely controlled environment, they can travel more smoothly through the network, and they have better control, that we can essentially decrease the lane, the amount of space required in a lane. We can fit more vehicles through the network on that way. We also can see we might be able to remove or minimize the size of shoulders and have additional clearance or reduced clearance requirements for vehicles. There are also issues with traffic control devices. So things like as mundane as pavement markings and signing. We don't quite understand, or the public sector does not quite understand how the automation or automated vehicles perceive road striping on the network, and we don't quite understand what level they need, or how high the quality of pavement markings need to be, or how they also are perceiving signing. For instance, our signs are designed today to be retroreflective, meaning that a high amount of light bounces off of them, and that's great for humans because humans can see them very easily, but at certain lighting configurations, automated vehicles with cameras may not be able to see those signs as well. There are also some issues with vehicle to infrastructure connectivity, but I'm going to discuss that in just a few moments. There's also uncertainty with travel patterns in urban planning. As commuting patterns could potentially change based on automation. If your vehicle allows you a much more convenient and comfortable commute, you may look at this and say, well, I can move further out into the suburbs or the exurbs, and I can have I can have more house, I can have a better yard, I can have all these amenities that living further away from the city provides. So we may see continuing exodus of people moving from the urban core into the suburbs and the exurbs. There might also be reduced reliance on transit, as an automated vehicle essentially provides you something that is very similar to a train or what transit can provide, that you can be comfortable in your commute, you can be working, you can be performing other tasks. There are also some, once again, implications on the transportation system. We have issues with long-term planning that we may need to be increasing investments in the road network, in the exurbs, in the suburbs, in these outer rims of the network, and we might need to be increasing investments in the external edges of the city. So what do we recommend with all this uncertainty that is pretty ubiquitous? First off, we recommend that you accept risk and uncertainty as a way of life. Right now, there's a potential for pretty high changes with the transportation network changing, and you have to face that and accept that it is coming on. You cannot essentially make decisions assuming constant conditions will continue when we know that they certainly will not. You have to state your goals and objectives, essentially say, what is it that I'm looking to do? If I'm a transportation agency looking at planning a road, can I essentially